My future stepdaughter destroyed my vintage wedding dress with paint and glitter, screams she hates me, and my dream wedding is ruined. I'm Emma. I'm 32, work in marketing, and I'm engaged to this amazing guy, Alan. Honestly, I wasn't even sure if I'd ever get married. My last relationship ended. Well, let's just say it wasn't pretty, and it left me with a lot of trust issues. But meeting Alan felt different. He's kind, patient, and has this quiet strength I really admire. He's also a dad to an 8-year-old girl, Rose, from his previous marriage. Now Rose is complicated. She's this whip-smart, sassy little thing who has a huge wall up when it comes to me. I get it though. Divorce is brutal on kids, and I'm this random new person who, in her eyes, might be trying to replace her mom. For the record, I'd never even think of doing that. I've been trying so hard to build a relationship with her, family therapy, one-on-one time, you name it. But most days, it feels like I'm running uphill with no end in sight. Some days, she'll tolerate me. Other days, she's icy, throwing little barbs my way. It's exhausting, but I keep telling myself that relationships take time, right? Anyway, fast forward to the really big thing. Alan proposed 6 months ago. He did it in this quiet, private way that was so him. We were hiking, one of our favorite things to do, and when we reached the top of this beautiful lookout, he pulled out the ring. I honestly ugly cried. Like, I tried to play it cool, but nope, full-on tears. I said yes, obviously, and we started planning the wedding. Here's the thing. I'm super sentimental, so I decided to wear my grandmother's wedding dress. She passed away a few years ago, and she was a huge part of my life growing up. The dress is this gorgeous, vintage lace number that she wore in the 1950s. It's been carefully preserved, and putting it on felt like having a piece of her with me on such an important day. Alan loved the idea, and I thought it might even be a nice way to share a little piece of my family history with Rose. You know? Like showing her that we're all becoming one family. But, well, Rose hasn't exactly been excited about the wedding. We've tried to include her in the planning, like letting her pick out flower arrangements or decide on her dress for the day, but she just keeps shutting down. Sometimes she'll roll her eyes or make snarky comments like, "This is boring," or "Why do you even need a wedding?" I've been brushing it off, thinking she's just acting out because it's a big change for her. But lately, the vibe has felt off, like there's this tension I can't quite put my finger on. So the wedding planning was in full swing, and honestly, it was both exciting and completely overwhelming. I'm not one of those people who's dreamed about their wedding since they were 5 or anything, but once we started putting things together, I got really into it. We found this cozy outdoor venue, and I'd spend hours scrolling through Pinterest for ideas. You know the drill: fairy lights, eucalyptus garlands, the works. It was shaping up to be something really special. But as excited as I was, things with Rose kept throwing me off. Every little attempt to include her felt like trying to hug a cactus. She'd shrug, mumble something dismissive, or just flat out ignore me. Like, I asked her to help me choose what kind of cupcakes we should have because, come on, what kid doesn't like cupcakes? And she just said, "I don't care. It's not my wedding." Ouch, right? I try not to take it personally, but it stung. Alan was great through all of this. He kept reassuring me that Rose just needed time and that it wasn't about me. "She's still processing everything," he'd say. And sure, logically, I knew he was right. Her parents had split up 2 years ago, and then here I was, jumping into her life. But emotionally, it was hard. I wanted so badly for us to have some kind of connection, even just a small moment of her letting me in. I kept telling myself, be patient, keep showing up, but it was tough not to feel like I was banging my head against a wall. Anyway, about a month before the wedding, Alan and I sat down with Rose and tried to have a heart-to-heart. We wanted her to feel included, not just in the wedding, but in this whole new chapter of our lives. We explained that this wasn't just about me and Alan. It was about all of us becoming a family. Looking back, I probably came on a little strong with the whole family talk because Rose just clammed up. She wouldn't even make eye contact. Alan tried asking her if she wanted to be a flower girl, and she just muttered, "I don't want to do anything." We didn't push her after that. I didn't want to force her to be involved if she really didn't want to be. But I couldn't help feeling like I was failing somehow. Like, was I doing something wrong? Was there something else I should have been doing? I started second-guessing everything. Then came the dress. Oh man, I was so excited about that dress. It had finally come back from the alterations place, and it fit like a dream. I had this whole plan to show it to Alan and Rose together, hoping it could be a sweet bonding moment. Like, look at this piece of history I'm bringing into the family. I even thought maybe Rose would think it was cool, an old, vintage dress with a story behind it. Spoiler alert, that's not what happened. The first time I showed it to Rose, she barely glanced at it. I tried explaining the significance, telling her stories about my grandmother and how much it meant to me. She just shrugged and said, "It looks old." I laughed it off in the moment, but truthfully, that one hurt. I mean, I get it. She's 8, and dresses aren't exactly a big deal to her. But I guess I was hoping for, I don't know, some kind of reaction other than apathy. Still, I didn't let it get me down. I was determined to make this work. I kept the dress in the spare room closet, carefully wrapped up so it would stay perfect for the big day. I'd even sneak in there sometimes just to look at it and remind myself why I was doing all of this. It was like my little anchor, something that kept me focused on the bigger picture when things got hard. But then, about a week before the wedding, I started noticing Rose acting different. She was quieter than usual, which is saying a lot because she's already pretty guarded. She'd disappear into her room for hours, and when she did talk to me, her tone was sharp, almost mean. At first, I figured it was nerves. Big changes can be scary for kids, right? But there was this weird tension in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. I brushed it off, thinking I was just overthinking things. But looking back now, I should have trusted my gut. Okay, so this is where everything kind of imploded. It was exactly 1 week before the wedding. I remember it so vividly because I'd just gotten home from running errands, last-minute stuff like picking up decor and confirming things with the florist. Alan was working late, so it was just me and Rose at home. When I walked in, the house was quiet. Too quiet. You know that eerie kind of silence where you just know something's not right? Yeah, that. I called out, "Rose, you okay?" No response. I figured she was probably in her room, so I went to put away the grocery bags first. That's when I noticed the door to the spare room, the one where I'd been keeping my wedding dress, was slightly open. My stomach dropped. Rose wasn't allowed in there, and she knew it. I wasn't like a strict rules kind of person, but I'd made it clear that the dress was super important to me and needed to stay safe. So seeing that door open, immediate bad vibes. I walked in and, oh my God, the sight will forever be burned into my brain. The dress, my grandmother's beautiful, irreplaceable wedding dress, was destroyed, absolutely shredded. The lace was in tatters, ripped into pieces that were scattered across the room. There were bright, chunky glitter glued onto parts of it, and someone, Rose, had poured what looked like neon pink craft paint all over it. It wasn't just ruined, it was obliterated. I froze. Like, my brain couldn't even process what I was looking at for a solid 10 seconds. Then I heard this tiny shuffle behind me. I turned, and there she was, Rose, just standing there in the hallway, watching me. She wasn't crying or looking guilty or scared. No, she had this blank expression on her face, almost like she was daring me to say something. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I managed to choke out, "Rose, what did you do?" And you know what she said? She just shrugged and went, "It's just a stupid old dress. Who cares?" I don't think I've ever felt so many emotions hit me at once. Anger, sadness, shock, betrayal. I was shaking, literally shaking, but I didn't want to lose it in front of her. I mean, she's a kid, and I know kids act out sometimes, especially when they're hurting. But this felt personal, like she wanted to hurt me. I took a deep breath and said, "Rose, I need you to explain to me why you did this." My voice was calmer than I felt, but inside I was barely holding it together. She crossed her arms and said, "Because I hate you. You're not my mom, and you never will be." That one hit like a punch to the gut. I don't even remember what I said after that, because I was so stunned. She ran back to her room and slammed the door, leaving me standing there in the middle of the mess she'd made. I just sank to the floor and stared at the ruined dress, trying not to cry, but failing miserably. My grandmother's dress, the one thing I had left of her, was gone. And it wasn't an accident. Rose had done it on purpose. When Alan got home later that night, he found me still sitting there, surrounded by the remnants of the dress. I must have looked like a wreck because his first words were, "Emma, what happened? Are you okay?" I could barely get the words out. I just pointed to the dress and said, "Rose." He looked at it, and I saw his face darken. Alan isn't a yeller. He's one of those people who's always calm and level-headed, but I could tell he was furious. He immediately went to talk to Rose, but it didn't go well. I could hear them from the hallway. She was yelling, saying things like, "I don't care," and "I wish you weren't marrying her." Alan was trying to stay calm, but even he was losing his patience. Eventually, she stormed off to her room again, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. That night, Alan and I sat in the living room in silence for what felt like hours. He tried to comfort me, saying things like, "She's just acting out, and I'll talk to her again tomorrow." But I couldn't stop crying. It wasn't just about the dress, though that alone was devastating. It was the fact that Rose hated me so much she'd go out of her way to do something this cruel. I started wondering if this was what my future was going to look like: constant tension, walking on eggshells, always being the outsider in my own family. I finally said to Alan, "I don't know if I can do this." He looked at me, his face full of worry, and asked, "Do what?" And I said, "Marry you. Be a stepmom. Any of it. I'm trying so hard, but it feels like she doesn't want me here, and I don't know if I can keep putting myself through this." His face just crumpled. He looked so heartbroken, and I hated myself for saying it, but it was the truth. I didn't know if I could handle it anymore. That night, I barely slept. I just kept replaying everything in my head: the destroyed dress, Rose's words, Alan's devastated face. I felt like I was unraveling. I mean, how do you bounce back from something like this? I wanted so badly to believe that Rose's actions were just a cry for help, but deep down, it felt like more than that. It felt like she truly hated me, and I didn't know how to fix it. The next morning, Alan suggested we all sit down together and talk it out. I wasn't sure if I had it in me, but I agreed because, honestly, what else could we do? Rose came into the living room, her arms crossed and her face set in that stubborn, defiant expression she'd been wearing so often lately. I tried to keep my emotions in check, but just seeing her made my chest tighten. Alan started off gently. He told her how much it hurt him to see her act out like this, and how important it was for us to work through things as a family. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd soften, but nope. She rolled her eyes and muttered, "I'm not part of her family." That's when I finally spoke up. I looked right at her and said, "Rose, I know you're angry. I know this is hard for you, but I need to understand why you did what you did, why you destroyed the dress." She didn't answer at first. She just stared at the floor, picking at a loose thread on her shirt. Alan prompted her gently, "Rose, please, talk to us." And then, finally, she snapped, "Because I don't want this stupid wedding to happen. I don't want you to marry her. I don't want her here. You're supposed to be with Mom, not her. She's ruining everything." Her voice cracked as she said it, and for the first time, I saw something other than anger on her face. There were tears in her eyes, and she looked scared, vulnerable even. It hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about me, or the wedding, or even the dress. This was about her feeling like her world was falling apart, and she had no control over it. I took a deep breath, feeling the tears welling up in my own eyes. "Rose," I said softly, "I'm not trying to take your mom's place. I could never do that. I just want to be here for you. I want us to be a family, but I know that's not something I can force. I'm sorry if I've made you feel like I was pushing too hard." She didn't say anything, but I could see her defenses starting to crack. Alan stepped in then, his voice calm but firm. "Rose, I know this is hard for you, but what you did was wrong. Destroying that dress didn't just hurt Emma, it hurt me too. We're in this together, and if you're upset, we need to talk about it, not lash out." And then, out of nowhere, she just started crying, like full-on sobbing. It was like all the anger and frustration she'd been holding in finally came pouring out. Alan pulled her into a hug, and for a moment, I just sat there unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but another part of me still felt so raw from everything that had happened. Eventually, Alan looked at me over her shoulder and gave me this pleading look, like he wanted me to join them. I hesitated, but then I got up and knelt down next to them. "Rose," I said, my voice shaking, "I'm not going anywhere. I know you don't want to hear that right now, but it's the truth. I love your dad, and I love you too. Even if it doesn't feel like it right now, I'm here for you. She didn't say anything, but she didn't pull away either. It wasn't some magical, movie-like moment where everything was suddenly better. But it was a start. At least I hoped it was. Later that day, Alan and I had a long talk. I told him how much I was struggling and how I wasn't sure if I was ready to move forward with the wedding. He listened, really listened, and told me he understood. He said he didn't want to rush into anything if it meant sacrificing the chance to build a stronger foundation as a family. That's when we made the decision to postpone the wedding. It wasn't an easy choice. Part of me felt like I was giving up or failing in some way. But Alan reminded me that this wasn't about one big day. It was about the life we were building together. And if that meant taking a step back to focus on Rose and figure things out, then that's what we needed to do. So, we postponed the wedding. Honestly, it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but deep down, I knew it was the right one. We told our close friends and family, and thankfully, everyone was super understanding. I mean, I'm sure there were a few raised eyebrows here and there, but nobody said anything to my face. And honestly, at that point, I didn't care what anyone thought. This wasn't about appearances or timelines. It was about making sure we weren't building our marriage on shaky ground. In the days that followed, things were tense. Rose was still keeping her distance, though she seemed a little less angry after the blow-up. Alan and I decided to get her into more intensive therapy, just one-on-one sessions this time, so she could have a safe space to work through everything without feeling like we were hovering. We also started going to couples therapy ourselves, which let me tell you was eye-opening. I realized I'd been so focused on trying to win Rose over that I hadn't really given myself the space to process my own feelings. Like, yeah, being a stepmom is hard, but it's also okay to admit that it's hard without beating yourself up for not being perfect. As for the dress, well, that was a loss I had to grieve. I cried about it more times than I'd like to admit, but eventually, I came to terms with the fact that it wasn't the dress itself that mattered. It was the love and memories it represented. My grandmother would have been the first to remind me that no piece of fabric, no matter how beautiful, could ever replace the bond we shared. Still, losing it hurt like hell. One thing that surprised me, though, was Alan. A few weeks after the incident, he showed me something he'd been working on in secret. He'd taken the salvageable pieces of the dress, the lace that hadn't been completely ruined, and turned them into a keepsake box. He worked with a local artisan to create this beautiful wooden box lined with the lace. And inside, he put a picture of my grandmother on her wedding day. I cried again, because apparently that's just my thing now. But this time, it wasn't out of sadness. It was one of the most thoughtful things anyone had ever done for me, and it reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. And Rose? Well, things are still a work in progress. She's been opening up more in therapy, and while she hasn't apologized directly for what happened, she's started being softer, I guess. Like, she'll actually sit with us at dinner instead of eating in her room, and she even asked me for help with a school project last week. It's baby steps, but I'll take them. One night, not long ago, she came into the living room while I was watching TV. She didn't say much, just kind of hovered by the door for a minute before finally blurting out, "I didn't mean to ruin everything." I asked her what she meant, and she just shrugged and said, "The wedding, the dress, everything." Her voice was quiet, and she wouldn't look at me, but I could tell she was trying. I didn't push her. I just said, "I know you didn't, Rose. I know this has been hard for you, and I want you to know that I'm not giving up on us." She didn't respond, but she sat down on the couch next to me and stayed there for the rest of the show. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. So, where are we now? Well, the wedding is still on hold, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Alan and I are stronger than ever, and we're focusing on being a team for each other and for Rose. I've learned that blending a family isn't a straight line. It's messy and complicated and full of setbacks. But it's also worth it, as long as you're willing to put in the work. If there's one thing I've taken away from all of this, it's that love isn't always enough on its own. It takes patience, understanding, and sometimes a whole lot of therapy. I'm not saying I have all the answers or that everything's perfect now, but I'm hopeful. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.